Welcome back to Artificial Evidence, the podcast where the smallest details lead to the biggest revelations. I am your host, Owen Carver. Today we are diving into one of the most unsettling cases in recent memory. It is a story that takes us into the depths of the earth, into the winding, pitch-black corridors of an underwater cave system, where light does not reach, and every breath must be measured against the weight of the stone above you. Cave diving is often called the most dangerous sport in the world, and for good reason. The slightest mistake, a wrong turn, a miscalculation of oxygen levels, and the cave becomes a tomb. But what happens when something more than bad luck is at play? In the summer of 2006, a group of experienced divers entered Devil's Maw, a treacherous underwater cave system deep in the Florida Panhandle. It was meant to be a routine exploration, a chance to map a new section of the cave. But by the time their dive was over, one man was dead, another was missing, and the survivors told conflicting stories. What really happened beneath the surface that day? This is Below the Surface. The entrance to Devil's Maw is little more than a hole in the earth, a small, unassuming spring hidden among the Spanish moss and gnarled cypress trees of the Florida wilderness. To the untrained eye, it is just another piece of the landscape, another body of water feeding into the swamp. But beneath the surface, it is something else entirely. Devil's Maw is a cave system spanning miles, twisting through ancient limestone, its passageways stretching into blackness. Even the most experienced divers know that every time they descend into its depths, they are taking their lives into their hands. On July 19, 2006, 4 men made that descent. Eric Dalton, 39 years old, a veteran diver with over a decade of experience mapping underwater caves. Jake Phillips, 31 years old, a skilled diver but newer to cave exploration, training under Eric's guidance. Lucas Brewer, 35 years old, an instructor with a reputation for pushing the limits of safety. And Ben Costas, 37 years old, a researcher specializing in underwater geology, known for his methodical approach and caution. The plan was straightforward. The team would explore a newly discovered passage deep within Devil's Maw, map its layout and mark any hazardous areas for future expeditions. They had dived together before. They trusted each other. At 10:15 a.m. they submerged. At 2:42 p.m. only 2 returned. Rescue teams were dispatched within the hour, but they already knew what they were looking for. In the world of cave diving, missing almost always means dead. Eric Dalton's body was found first, wedged in a narrow tunnel barely 3 feet wide. His regulator was still in his mouth, his air tank still half full. There was no sign of struggle, no indication that he had panicked or run out of oxygen. It was as if he had simply stopped moving. His wrist-mounted dive computer recorded his last movement at 1:28 p.m. Ben Costas was nowhere to be found. Lucas and Jake, the 2 who had made it back, were in shock, shaken. But their stories did not match. Lucas claimed they had all been together, that everything had been fine until Ben decided to turn back early. Jake insisted that Ben never turned back at all, that something happened in the deep, something they were not prepared for. The autopsy on Eric Dalton only deepened the mystery. There was no water in his lungs, meaning he had not drowned. His body showed no signs of trauma, no evidence of a sudden medical event. But there was something strange. A small cut along his air hose, almost imperceptible, but enough to cause a slow leak. A leak that could have been enough to cause a problem if someone had wanted it to. It was not a natural tear. It was too clean, too precise. Investigators began to suspect foul play. Lucas and Jake were questioned separately, their accounts scrutinized. Lucas held firm. Ben had turned back alone. Jake wavered. His initial story, that Ben had stayed with them, began to unravel. He admitted that there had been tension in the group, that Lucas and Eric had argued earlier in the dive over something minor, that at one point, Ben had signaled for them to stop, but Lucas had ignored him and kept going. Jake had followed. He was not sure what happened after that, but he knew one thing. The last time he saw Ben, he had been with Lucas, and then he was gone. A search for Ben's body continued for weeks. Nothing. Devil's Maw was unforgiving, its tunnels winding and shifting with the water's current. If he had gotten lost, if he had made a wrong turn, his body could have been pushed deep into a passageway too narrow for rescue divers to reach. The official ruling, accidental death. But unofficially, some investigators believed otherwise. Eric Dalton's air hose had been cut. Ben Costas had vanished. Lucas Brewer was the last person to see them both alive, and yet there was no evidence, no motive, no confession, only questions. Years passed. The case remained open, but no new leads surfaced. Then, in 2011, a group of recreational divers exploring an uncharted section of Devil's Moor stumbled across something unexpected. A dive bag wedged between two rock formations. Inside, a dive computer, and on it, a name: Ben Costas. The data from the dive computer told its own story. Ben's last recorded depth was 127 feet. His last movement was at 1:29 p.m., 1 minute after Eric Dalton had stopped moving. They had died at almost the exact same time. Ben had not turned back early, he had been with Eric, and that meant Lucas had lied. Today, Devil's Moor remains one of the most infamous cave systems in the world. The deaths of Eric Dalton and Ben Costas are still classified as accidental. Lucas Brewer and Jake Phillips have both moved on, neither speaking publicly about that day. But for those who have followed the case, for those who have studied the dive data and the inconsistencies in the story, one question remains unanswered. Was it an accident? Or did someone, ensure that not everyone would make it back to the surface? Thank you for listening to Artificial Evidence. If you have thoughts or theories, let us know on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. And remember, the algorithm knows.